Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about insights for self-study in the golden age. This is going to be a play on Gerald's keynote. So at Wild West Hacking Fest, we talked about before in December, we talked about Wild West Hacking Fest talks. And Gerald went through, and his entire premise was the fact that we are in the golden age of education, of just information out there. Back in the good old days, like Jerry was talking about, you'd go up to, the convenience store or book comic store, and, you'd buy a magazine in order to learn information security, or really, it wasn't even that. It was a lot more difficult to get into the industry and learn what you needed to learn, practice it, and so forth. And so nowadays we have the internet, we have AI, we have all kinds of communities and instant messaging apps and so forth. So there's so many different ways and methods that you can get out there and learn not just GRC or information security, but pretty much everything. Of course, there's going to be different barriers with different topics, but a lot of it applies to such. Now, I did want to give a little bit of about me. So in most presentations, people will go through and do this. I believe most of you guys probably know a little bit about me at least. I say strong passions, technology, GRC, 98% of that NIST. I absolutely love NIST. And then also community, of course. So not only with Study GRC, but all of the surrounding communities that we have. And then self-study enthusiast. I really say that because even before I was pushing for all of this with GRC and information security and so forth, I've really stepped my toe in a lot of different things. So from welding and doing tires, and I did sales for a while. I went through and studied for commercial drone pilot license for a year. So I've really kind of like built up all kinds of different stuff and studied things throughout my life as well. And I feel like that's kind of gave me a little bit of an advantage from the get-go because I was already so prepared on the self-study portion, even though I was very overwhelmed once I realized how big that Sec Plus was. And I just noticed in chat right there, so Space Tacos mentions that I looked very serious in that picture that was on LinkedIn. Yes. I just had to supply the mugshot. That's my response to that. But moving on. So should you even learn self-study anyways? Like, what's the point? Some people may think that, just going off and getting a mentor to teach you, a teacher, just go enroll in college and so forth. Why should you even self-study at all? And these are just some of the different advantages that I like to highlight. So you're going to be self-studying the rest of your life in this industry, whether you like that or not. If it's a make or break, really. So especially in the technology industry, the industry changes at such a rapid rate that you can't just be stagnant with it. So especially in this industry that we primarily discuss in, it really is something that you just have to get used to some extent. Cost effectiveness as well. So typically it's a lot cheaper than just going off and paying for college, for an example, or taking SANS courses and things like that. So especially when you're looking out of pocket, it's cheaper. And another thing, like I've talked to many people, and that a lot of people might not stick with it. They get interested, and then they get 6 weeks in, and then they're like, oh, I don't know about this anymore. And maybe within that 6 weeks, they already invested thousands of dollars into things. And I've talked to people who've dropped $15,000 into a boot camp and got nothing out of it. So that's what I'm going to discuss a little bit more in depth later on as well. Now, flexibility and personalization. So this gives you a little bit more flexibility, especially on the self-study portion. I believe everybody in chat has experience with self-study, most certainly. But one thing I really like about it is that it's flexible. It's not like you have to do it this time, you have to do it that time. Another big portion about it as well is you can kind of organize it in which way makes sense to you. Like for an example, the Sec Plus, I have a spreadsheet that's publicly available, by the way, that just has all of the different objectives, and I went through and color coded them. And I didn't do the Sec Plus and study that in order. I just went through it and I was like, oh, I know a little bit about that. Let's dig into this. And then I was like, oh, I have no idea what that is. And I have 2 hours to kill. So let's do it. So there's flexibility with it. Now, how online communities enable continuous growth. Who would I be without including something about community even furthermore in here? So primarily shared knowledge and peer support. So not only do we share knowledge by just talking about different topics and asking questions and everything else. So many of us, there's a couple dozen of us in chat alone, and each one of us comes from a completely different background, maybe similar industries, but there's a lot of collective knowledge that's out there. And that's extremely valuable. That's one thing that I really like talking to people, is because you get such insight. Now also the peer support. Just the other day an individual was asking questions in regards to like support on studying and just keeping up with things and so forth. I mentioned it before, and I mentioned it in the Discord then, on the fact that like without community, without talking to everybody and making so many connections and friends and so forth, I would have most certainly burned out. It's way easier when you have some type of support system to be like, man, I just don't understand this. Or, man, I'm just getting burned out on it. Like, what do I do? Like, having that outlet is very important. Now, with that said, community is great and everything else, but also so is effective communication. Clarify your goals and be specific. So that is where, effective communication, you don't want to just be like, hey, how's it going? Or I have a question, and then wait hours on end. I just position it right off the bat. Just throw everything out there and be like, hey, I don't understand what an IDS is, and I don't understand the concept. I've never seen this before. What the hell does that even look like? And then hopefully, somebody drops a photo in chat and is like, oh yeah, this is what it is, and here's a great visual video on YouTube all about it. Problem solved, or whatever various topic it could be. But just keep in mind, especially, that effective communication is extremely important, and especially in business, you just don't want to waste people's time. Just be upfront off the bat on what your needs are. Now, I kind of, all of this entire slide will be available in the Discord after the stream as well. But so this is kind of like one of the two different walkthroughs that I put together. So definitely define the clear goals, and that's where that SMART method comes in. And I had mentioned about B-Dubs' website before earlier, and she has an awesome walkthrough along with a really good infographic that goes along with it. And just go through, read that article, and then just work on implementing it. Once you start implementing the SMART goals, then it just becomes easier. It becomes like second nature, like, oh, okay, I have this system now. And it makes it a lot easier. And I feel like that also takes some of the stress off too, because like one of that is achievability. You need to have realistic goals and not overestimate yourself. So now we're moving into create the learning plan. So you figure out what you want to do. You put together some SMART goals. Okay, well, how much time do you have? What's that kind of schedule look like? What webinars do you want to attend? What workshops are you going to do? What books do you want to read? That's when you have to go into like the project management. And then you're like, okay, so these are my goals that I have put together, but now you need to actually put those on the schedule. And I highly recommend, even if you just work 40 hours a week and then you study the rest of your time, use a calendar. Whether you write it down on a physical calendar that you pick up at the store, or you use a digital calendar, it's a lot easier, for me at least, to visualize that and actually see it, even if you just have those two things on there where you have work and study. So it's just one thing that I really like to do. So then seeking feedback and evaluation throughout like the Sec Plus, which I really like to reference back to because that was extremely difficult for me. I went into complete panic mode after about 3 or 4 days and realizing how broad that is. Getting that different feedback, doing the practice tests, figuring out like what areas you need to work on. It's very, very difficult to identify how far you've come in a particular topic or area that you're studying. You don't really feel like a different person, and I'm sure many of you guys also feel the exact same. So you have to kind of document that down. And like my method when I'm studying something is I go through, I love color coding. And that's probably why like I love GRC so much, because I love infographics and color coding and spreadsheets. So, just literally I do green for I love it, I'm good, I'm comfortable with it. Yellow if I'm like, I kind of sort of get it, but I'm probably going to forget it. And then red is like, I have no idea what this is, or I really know I need to work on it. So you could figure out your own color system, or, different methods with that, but some type of system to identify and track your progress as well. Seek feedback, and I already read that portion. Apply what you learn. So as soon as possible, I put ASAP right here, because if you just read it out of a book, you're going to end up forgetting parts of that eventually. So you need to enact that as soon as possible. Like people have asked, like when they're going through the GRC masterclass, oh, what should I do after I complete the course? Oh, well, you could do these things. But also I premised the fact that while you're going through and watching the video content, follow along. Pull up a spreadsheet, make up your own thing. He walks you through one of the spreadsheets, and you could do the exact same thing as you're watching the video. Even if you have to pause the video or otherwise, I find that to be way better for long-term memory than just listening and then 3 days later, I'm working on it. So you want to take that knowledge and then you want to do something with it as soon as possible. And that really helps reinforce that. And these are like my tips on, what works for me too, and some stuff to throw out there. Harness the power of technology, of course. So this is the second walkthrough that I mentioned. We have AI, we have all kinds of different stuff out there nowadays. And this is where the whole golden era comes in, is because it's just so accessible for so many people now. It's not available for everybody, but a lot of people have access to the internet nowadays, even if it's from your cell phone, and you could still learn a lot of different things. So like the way that I kind of think about it, and I put it down on here, is like just ease into it, where I get interested in a particular topic, so I start Google dorking it. There's a great article that's on Try Hack Me that I could drop later that goes all about Google dorking and what that is and how you do it. Read blogs, books, socialize, just start finding all of these different resources and start digging into the topic itself. That is typically where I see most other people tend to do, is they start looking into it and then they slowly start to progress. But now the next step that I identify is the dig into it. And that's when you start finding community and others who share the topic. That, I believe, is a very crucial step. And the reason I say that is because I've also seen many, many people who go from 0 to 60, where they'll do a little bit of research and say, oh, this is something that's neat. But then they'll research it for 3 or 4 days or a couple weeks, and then they'll instantly go off and drop $1,000 into CompTIA Cert Master like I did, because I didn't know any better. I was like, oh, yeah, this is really cool and everything else. I'm just going to, throw it out there and hope for the best. That's where, especially when you're digging into a topic or otherwise, whether it's GRC or anything, I think it's very valuable to do your research and then try to find other people who share that interest or who work in that industry by utilizing Google, by just looking around on the Discord servers, by just talking with people. Maybe you could find a community online. There's Facebook groups. There's the several different community things, like I think it's meetup.com or otherwise, where you could just try to locate these people. And then you get others' opinions in that industry itself, or at least in that interest group. And then the next step is where you go into the invest. That's when you're like, yes, this is something I am like dead set on. I am doing this. And that's when you're starting to look at the paid courses, industry certifications that have an ROI for return on investment, and going to conferences, and you're like full blown, you're going for it. I think this really helps to also identify along that process. And there should be a gap of time in between these as well. Because like I said, I kind of put it this way because I also see a lot of people who, kind of jump through it. Let's see. And then staying ahead of the curve. So these are some other really important parts that I want to throw in here. So embrace the continuous learning. I've worked in other industries as well, and it's very, very similar, especially in this industry. That's something that you just have to kind of come to terms with. I can't stress that enough. So there's so much information out there. And how are we supposed to, especially in GRC, how are we supposed to identify these risks if we don't know what's out there? And that's ever evolving, and it always will be. So that's pretty important. And then even the software we use gets updated and new technologies come out, and we have AI advancing at an incredible speed. So very, very important. Staying informed goes hand in hand with that as well. I subscribe to multiple different newsletters. I go through and look at different blogs. I think it's Dark Reading, that is one of my favorites. But there's all kinds of different ones out there. That's also where like the Daily Cyber Threat Briefing comes on. And even if you look at other industries, there's other like associations and memberships and newsletters and things like that in that as well. Networking and collaborating, so that, community, which I was talking on earlier. And then also experiment and innovate. That's when you're actually practicing hands-on. If you don't use it, you lose it, kind of thing. That's how I kind of feel. Like I welded for years, and then, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, I was like, oh, I could just, weld this section of the trailer that broke, no problem. Yeah, well, it's not exactly like riding a bicycle. It works, but it's not as perfect as I used to be. So, and with some of the concepts and things that we do in GRC, at least, I wouldn't say that you're going to completely lose it. Like I've stated before and recently, is the most important part is understanding the concepts and the ability to do so, finding the information. But still, even with all the resources I come across, like I lose track. So it's reinforcing that memory portion. And there's actually a really good book that I didn't even add in here that I think is very good that goes with this as well. And I added this section too, of course, because use community. I could just stand here all night and say that. And I mean, I just don't know what else to say about that because it's just so valuable. There's no way I would have stuck with it this long without support and without community and other assistance and perspectives and so forth. There's so many different communities, not even on Discord, that you can reach out to, get involved. It doesn't even have to be Simply Cyber or otherwise. I just happened to come across Simply Cyber on LinkedIn one day because somebody told me, oh, you should have a LinkedIn for this industry. And I came across one of the articles and then I joined the server and I was like, oh, this is pretty neat. And I ended up digging into it. You could do the exact same with any other community as well that you mix well, the culture fit. And yeah, the future of self-study, just embrace the changes because also, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, the industry, it's going to be different. There's going to be new technologies that we could utilize and so just keep up with it. So, and that is the end of my TED Talk. I hope you guys found that insightful.